and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Pakistan has repeated its resolve to facilitate a political settlement in Afghanistan but warned against the role of spoilers. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said this while speaking to his Afghan counterpart Hanif Atmar over the phone. Qureshi said Afghan parties must work constructively for a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. Saudi Arabia has accused Iran of supporting Houthi attacks on the kingdom. In an interview, Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubair said the Yemeni rebels carried out the attacks using Iranian-made weapons. Earlier, the U.S. condemned the latest Houthi attacks on a Saudi oil refinery in capital Riyadh. In Myanmar, coup opponents are holding more protests as international pressure on the military generals to shun violence increases. 2 more people were killed overnight after soldiers opened fire in the northern ruby mining town of Mogok. Activists say 237 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. China says a high-level strategic dialogue with the United States was candid, constructive and helpful. Talking to media after conclusion of 3 rounds of top and direct talks in Alaska, Beijing's top diplomat Yang Jiechi said some important differences between the 2 sides still persist. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the world's top economies found areas where their interests overlap. The global number of coronavirus deaths has surpassed 2.7 million, while the caseload has exceeded 122 million. Brazil has reported record high 90,570 COVID-19 cases and second highest 2,815 deaths. Amid safety concerns over AstraZeneca's vaccine, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has received his first dose of the Oxford jab. Meanwhile, Pakistan has registered over 3,800 new cases and 42 deaths overnight, with a death toll at almost 13,800. And in football, RB Leipzig have moved within 1 point of leaders Bayern Munich after edging Arminia Bielefeld 1-0 in the German Bundesliga. Austrian international Marcel Sabitzer netted the winner for Leipzig. Leipzig are in second place with 57 points, while Arminia remain at 15th with 22 points. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Pakistan has repeated its resolve to facilitate a political settlement in Afghanistan, but warned against the role of spoilers. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said this while speaking to his Afghan counterpart Hanif Atmar over the phone. Qureshi said Afghan parties must work constructively for a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. The 2 foreign ministers exchanged views on matters of cooperation, including trade ties. Qureshi also invited Atmar to visit Pakistan at the earliest convenience. This comes against the backdrop of an extended Troika meeting. U.S. envoy Salman Khalilzad termed the meeting as productive diplomacy, which supports the Afghan peace process. Saudi Arabia has accused Iran of supporting Houthi attacks on the kingdom. Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubair says the Yemeni rebels carried out the attacks using Iranian-made weapons. Al-Jubair said the presence of what he called the Iranian-backed separatists does not mean the peace is impossible in Yemen. In an interview, he said the rebels belong on a terrorism list and nobody should deal with them. Earlier, the U.S. condemned the latest Houthi attack on a Saudi oil refinery in capital Riyadh. State Department spokesperson Jelena Porter said this behavior shows an utter lack of concern for the safety of the civilian population. The UAE, Kuwait, Qatar and Lebanon also condemned the attack, describing it as a threat to the regional stability. In Myanmar, coup opponents are holding more protests as international pressure on the military generals to shun violence increases. 2 more people were killed overnight after soldiers opened fire in the northern ruby mining town of Mogok. Meanwhile, UN Rapporteur Tom Andrews has called for sanctions in response to the army's ruthless attacks. In another development, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved legislation condemning the military coup, and the European Union is expected to impose sanctions on military leaders and army-run businesses. Activists said 237 protesters have been killed in the military crackdown since the February 1st coup. China says the strategic dialogue with the United States was candid, constructive and helpful. The 2-day talks marked the first high-level contact between the two countries since President Joe Biden took office. Talking to media after the conclusion of 3 rounds of tough and direct talks in Alaska, China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi said some important differences still persist. Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Beijing hopes Washington will meet it halfway with mutual respect. Wang reiterated that sovereignty and territorial integrity are major issues of principle. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the two sides had a very candid conversation on an expansive agenda. Talking to reporters, Blinken said the world's top economies found areas where their interests overlap. He added these include Iran, North Korea, Afghanistan, and climate change. 13 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in several attacks in Nigeria's northwestern Kano state. Authorities say the gunmen attacked communities in Zangon Kataf, Kwaro, and Chakon areas of the state. They said assailants razed 56 houses, 16 motorcycles, and burned several barns. Officials said troops were mobilized to repel the attacks. The gangs, locally known as bandits, burn and ransack villages and target schools for kidnappings for ransom. The number of global coronavirus deaths has surpassed 2.7 million, while the caseload has exceeded 122 million. Brazil has reported the highest single-day cases, with more than 90,000 people testing positive overnight, while some 2,800 more people lost their lives in the country, the second highest number of deaths in one day. Details in the following report.
The health, economic and political complications prompted by the coronavirus pandemic are worsening by the day. A cohort of global scientists led by King's College London said there is growing evidence that COVID-19 can cause diabetes in some patients. In South America, many nations are facing an acute health crisis. Ecuador's health minister has resigned after less than 3 weeks on the job as prosecutors investigate allegations of favoritism in the rollout of vaccines. Meanwhile, Mexico's president thanked his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden for agreeing to provide 2.7 million vaccines. In the U.S., Dr. Anthony Fauci says the more contagious and likely more deadly variants linked to the U.K. is rapidly spreading in the U.S.
And that relates to the threat of a variant of concern, particularly the B.1.1.7 variant, which right now, as we know, is causing a significant degree of concern in Europe, where the flare and the surge that they are seeing is directly related to the variant 1.1.7. This variant, as you know, is every day getting more and more dominant.
Germany's health minister has warned of vaccine scarcity in Europe to contain the third wave of COVID-19. More countries are resuming the use of AstraZeneca's vaccine after assurances that its benefits outweigh the risks. Meanwhile, the UK and French prime ministers have received their first shots of the Oxford jab.
I really don't. I think you should listen. Don't just listen to me. Listen to all the scientists. Listen to what the European Medicines Agency had to say yesterday to what the MHRA has said. The risk is COVID. This is a great thing to do.
Meanwhile, India has recorded over 40,000 new COVID-19 cases, the highest in 4 months.
In Pakistan, another 42 people have died of COVID-19 overnight, taking the death toll to 13,799. The Health Ministry said nearly 3,900 people tested positive for the virus in the last 24 hours. The ministry said the countrywide caseload has crossed 623,000, of which more than 579,000 people have recovered. The ministry said the number of active cases has risen to over 29,000. It said more than 2,100 patients are in critical condition. Meanwhile, Pakistan's positivity ratio has jumped to nearly 10%. Turkey has told the EU it has maintained a constructive approach in the Mediterranean despite provocations from Greece and Cyprus. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan held a virtual meeting with the European Union chiefs. Tensions have flared over a dispute between Turkey and Greece over maritime jurisdiction in the Mediterranean. In the meeting, the Turkish presidency said Erdogan repeated a proposal for a regional Eastern Mediterranean conference. In a statement, it said the president expects a result from the upcoming EU summit that will pave the way for concrete efforts to move forward. Erdogan said the migrant burden on Turkey is rising. In a separate statement, the European Commission said it underlined the importance of sustained de-escalation. Meanwhile, the Turkish Coast Guard said they found 3 migrants dead in waters of the Aegean coastal town of Sizme after Greek Coast Guard beat them. The Greek Coast Guard rejected accusations, saying they do not treat migrants or people in danger that way. The White House says U.S. President Joe Biden will meet with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin when the time is right. Speaking to the media, spokeswoman Karine Jean-Pierre said Biden is going to be very frank and open about the U.S.-Russia relationship. This comes a day after Putin said he and Biden should hold live online talks in the coming days. Earlier, the U.S. president called Putin a killer during an interview, prompting diplomatic ties to sink to a new low. Putin reacted to criticism by saying it takes one to know one. On Wednesday, Russia pulled its U.S. ambassador, Anatoly Antonov, in response to the comments. International Criminal Court has sent notifications to Israel and Palestine of the opening of a war crimes probe. In a statement, the prosecutor's office said the parties have 1 month to seek a deferral. Earlier this month, the ICC prosecutor Fatou Bensouda said she would formally investigate war crimes in the Palestinian territories. While Palestinian Authority welcomed the announcement, Israel denounced it. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has affirmed that its position on Israel remains unchanged. Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs Adil Al-Jubeir said the recent normalization deals will pay off only if they change Israel's position with regard to the annexation of Palestinian territory. Hundreds of Muslim students and activists rallied in Dhaka to denounce the upcoming visit of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The protesters criticized Modi's anti-Muslim policies and called him the butcher of Gujarat. The demonstrators chanted anti-India and anti-Modi slogans, asking him not to come to Dhaka. They also lashed out at the Bangladeshi Prime Minister for inviting Modi. The Indian Prime Minister is due to arrive in Dhaka on the 26th of March. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. President Joe Biden has deplored a recent surge in anti-Asian violence in the United States. This comes after a deadly shooting rampage in Georgia left 8 people dead, including 6 women of Asian descent. During a visit to Georgia, Biden met leaders and state lawmakers from the Asian American community. Speaking after the meeting, Biden asked all Americans to stand together against hate. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is of Asian American descent, also accompanied the president. Harris said racism, xenophobia, and sexism have always been real in America.
Over the past year, 3,800 such incidents have been reported, 2 of 3 by women. Everything from physical assaults to verbal accusations. And it's all harmful. And sadly, it's not new. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America, and always has been. Sexism, too.
Meanwhile, New Yorkers gathered for a vigil in support of victims of the Georgia attacks. And now moving on, the U.S. and Chinese ambassadors to the United Nations have clashed over racism. The argument took place during a General Assembly meeting to mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. U.S. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said racism continues to be a daily challenge. However, she added for millions of people in countries like China and Myanmar, it is deadly. In response, China's Deputy UN Ambassador Dai Beng said the U.S. has no license to tell other countries what to do. Dai said Thomas-Greenfield admitted to her country's ignoble human rights record. He called on the U.S. to address racial discrimination, social injustice, and police brutality on its soil. China has banned U.S.-made Tesla cars from entering the military housing complexes over security concerns. In a directive, the Army advised the Tesla owners to park their cars outside of military properties. The military said the cameras installed on the vehicles can be used for spying purposes. Like many other automakers, Tesla uses several small cameras to help guide parking and self-driving functions. Tesla's China market has an increasing role in the company's deliveries and production. In 2017, the U.S. Army ordered its members to stop using Chinese drones due to cyber vulnerabilities in the products. The U.S. has called on Somalia to hold transparent and inclusive elections as soon as possible to end the deadlock. In a statement, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on all stakeholders to set aside narrow political objectives. He urged them to safeguard the country's future and find an agreement to conduct parliamentary and presidential polls. He said the current impasse undermines progress made and hinders the fight against terrorism. Somalia missed a deadline to hold an election by February 8, sparking a constitutional crisis. In the United States, a court has charged 4 leaders of far-right Proud Boys with conspiring to block Congress from certifying President Joe Biden's election. The indictment says the 4 worked to obtain paramilitary equipment used for the attack on the U.S. Capitol on the 6th of January. It also says the effort included soliciting donations through an online campaign to help the Proud Boys pay for protective gear. More than 300 people have been charged in connection with the Capitol attack, which left 5 people dead. 20 of the charged people are associated with the Proud Boys, and some of the others have been tied to anti-government militias. In Peru, heavy rain, floods and mudslides have cut off communities and left families homeless in the northern Piura region. More than 3,600 families in the remote mountainous area are left stranded after 5 bridges collapsed. The locals say they have no access to drinking water and electricity. Authorities say the homeless may have to be permanently relocated to avoid similar incidents in the future. Housing Minister Solangel Fernandez toured the region to assess the damage. Social media platforms WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram suffered a brief service outage across the globe. All 3 platforms belong to the US-based social media giant Facebook. Outage tracking website Down Detector showed nearly 1 million people reporting issues with Instagram. It said 20,000 users posted about problems with WhatsApp on the website. Facebook attributed the outage to unspecified technical issues and apologized to users. However, a spokesperson for the company said it resolved the issue, which prevented access to services. French daredevil Wellington deluge took to the sky with some death-defying stunts at an abandoned ski resort in France. More in this report. Delig turned the deserted Everia resort into his own personal playground as he sped right across it. All geared up, he first took off from the snow-capped mountains to paraglide over and through the resort. While in the air, he launched off the rooftops and even ground his skis on a chairlift cable. He then landed to put on some insane ground tricks, including a backflip through an igloo. While keeping his glider intact on the ground, he again lifted off to the sky by fastening a ride from a horse-drawn sleigh. The 28-year-old started as an alpine free skier and paraglider before combining the two disciplines to master the field of speed riding. Delig dominated the tour in 2014. A breathtaking art exhibit is drenching viewers in a kaleidoscope-like world in New York's Chelsea market. More in this report.
Embark upon a cinematic journey where the sheer beauty of mathematics, nature, and architecture coincide to inspire introspection and awe. Using fractals, mathematical equations represented as infinitely repeating patterns, Dutch artist Julius Horthuis manifested an art installation, running them through a computer software.
Julius, as I know, came across fractals while doing research for a separate project and instantly felt a connection with them. He was fascinated by how through mathematics you could take someone on a journey through almost an entirely new world. He has a background in film, and he was able to kind of combine that passion with fractal art. And in the same way that, you know, a documentary takes you through a journey of something in our real world, Julius, as the fractal artist, is able to take an audience on a journey through these fractal worlds.
Spectators have said it feels like being inside of a kaleidoscope, or like stepping into a science fiction world, or even being transmitted to a totally new dimension.
In the age we're living in, and after, you know, over a year of pandemic, and for a lot of people being isolated, we need something like this more than ever. I think art for a lot of people can be an escape or a refuge.
Geometric Properties runs through September 6 at Artec House.
In Turkey, a tropical-looking turquoise lake in the southwestern town of Yatagan worries environmentalists. It contains heavy metals such as selenium, cadmium, boron, and others. More about this lake in this report. Known as an ash dam, the toxic lake is composed of wastewater and polluted ash that are generated by the nearby Yatagan power plant. Locals fear the metals leaking into the earth and groundwater will cause health problems.
Its beauty is coming from its toxic structure, so it doesn't look beautiful to the residents of the village, of the surrounding village, or to the environmentalists. So actually that's the reason it's being a toxic lake. It's not a natural one.
Campaigners say pollution from the coal mine and burn at Yatagan has led to major environmental damage. Ash Dam is one of the 15 wastewater lakes in Turkey that they fight to stop from causing further damage to nature.
The coal plants were allowed to operate without the disposal sites meeting no environmental standards or criteria. So that's why it's a very important decision, and we hope that the final decision of the court will be as such. And yeah, this decision will give the public authorities the power of shutting down, stopping the operation of those irresponsibly operating coal plants.
Earlier this month, the campaigners won a legal victory. The State Council issued a decision cancelling a law that postpones filtration requirements in thermal power plants. As per the decision, all thermal power plants that operate without modernized filters will have to stop their operations until they meet the standards. UK says G7 finance ministers have agreed to support a sizable IMF aid for the poorest nations hit by the pandemic. The declaration comes after a virtual gathering of ministers. British Finance Minister Rishi Sunak said it will be ensured that no country is left behind in the global economic recovery. In a statement, he said the increase in aid will be in the volume of IMF's special drawing rights. IMF's Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, hailed the development and called the meeting productive. Last year, the monetary body said it wanted the allocation of SRDRs to rise to the equivalent of $500 billion, but that expansion was opposed by then U.S. President Donald Trump. In the U.S. state of Texas, a federal jury has directed Apple to pay over $300 million to personalize media communications. The tech giant was charged with infringing a patent related to digital rights management. The licensing firm sued Apple in 2015, alleging that the firm's iTunes service infringed 7 of its patents. Apple successfully challenged the personalized media communications case at the U.S. Patent Office, but an appeals court reversed that decision in March last year and paved the way for the trial. However, the iPhone maker says it is disappointed with the ruling and will appeal. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.